Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Future of Work show, where we get to discuss ideas that are going to be relevant to all our futures. Now, if you're a regular follower of the show, you'll know that we invite guests and speak about a variety of topics. So, we've spoken about a lot of topics that speak about what the organization of the future is going to look like. We've spoken about what HR of the future will look like, what leadership of the future will look like. We've also had a number of conversations around technology. So, what will the human robotic interface look like? How will we work with artificial intelligence? What will be the role of analytics? And today, we're here to discuss a topic that's really close to my heart, not because I've trained in it, but because I understand just how important it's going to be for organizations to be successful over the next few years. And that topic is innovation. I also have with me a very special guest, Professor Vijaykumar, whom I'm just going to bring on. Good morning, Professor Kumar.
Hello, Shalini. Good evening for you.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's really early morning in Chicago.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is 7 o'clock in the morning. Not too early, but I'm wide awake and ready to
Oh,
go.
no, really, really appreciate it. So, for those of us who are joining us, let me share a little bit of background on Professor Kumar. Professor Vijay Kumar is actually the author of the bestseller 101 Design Methods. And that's really how I got introduced to his work. So, several years ago, when I was exploring design thinking ideas and trying to understand different methods, someone referred me to your book, Professor Kumar, and I loved it. I was just fascinated. It's like an encyclopedia which documents, of course, as the title says, 101 design methods. And I absolutely loved the way it approached some topics which, in fact, I hadn't seen any of the other design thinking methodologies approach. So that's how I got introduced to your work. Now, Professor Kumar is the Charles Owen Endowed Chair in Design, and he works at the School of Design in the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. But for over 12 years, he was the chief methodologist at Dublin, which is now a part of Deloitte. Now, he's conducted over 100 seminars and workshops with senior executives all over the world on topics around innovation and design thinking. So, we are so fortunate to have you join us today. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here with you and have a great conversation, Shalini.
Thank you. So, Professor Kumar, let's just start by, I'd love to understand what was some of the thinking that went behind creating the encyclopedia 101 Design Methods. What was your motivation?
Great. So let me go back to my journey a little bit backwards. My early triggers on the topic itself, design methods,
Yeah.
came from my undergraduate days, in which I was doing product design at National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. That is a time when the Professor Kumar Vyas used to talk about design methods. He taught a class on design methods, and I was young, and I was trying to understand what design is all about. And I got the opportunity to sort of read so many gurus at that time was focused on the methodology of design, like Christopher Alexander, Christopher Jones, Bruce Archer, and Victor Papnik. And they are extremely brilliant people talking about the design can be done in very specific ways. So I was fascinated by the process of design at that time. I also met a lot of leaders and thinkers from around the world. At that time, I was fascinated by how their brain works, connecting dots and dealing with very complex ideas and come out with design solutions. So that is the beginning of my interest in the topic itself. So I got passionate about the topic, and the rest of my career somehow I was focused on that. But as I went along, I also at that time, kind of later on, I kind of realized one important idea, which is the process over products. right? If you really sort of work on a very disciplined process and a sort of method that you can apply on any kind of creative activity, developing, innovating a product or a service or an experience, whatever it is, you're applying that process. And if you streamline your process, it can be applied. The application and impact is so wide compared to developing just one product, right? If you design one product, it ends with that product. That product might be great, but it ends there, right? Then you have to go and do another one to make an impact. Whereas process is much a process design or thinking about process has a wider impact. That fascinated me. That sort of gave me more confidence on focusing on the idea of design methods and process itself. But as I went along, my influences about understanding the idea of design methods was even accelerated by some of the organizations that I was part of. Institute of Design at Illinois in Chicago was leading organizational thinker on process design. Sometimes the school is known as the method school, right? So that is a fantastic place for me to be in pursuing my interest. And then I joined Dublin Group at that time, which was pioneering the early methods of design and design a strategic force for organizations in 1990 when I joined Dublin. When it started, I got a lot of opportunities to develop methods and processes that I can experiment with in the context of actual client projects. We had clients like Apple, Texas Instruments, IBM, and McDonald's, and they were elongated and a long time projects in which I really could develop some of the methods and processes along with my colleagues. We had a wonderful team of business analysts and engineers and technologists and social scientists and anthropologists and literature experts and storytellers, all of us working together in a very sort of interesting way to impact the world. So that broad experience gave me more confidence in terms of working on the process and methods. But they reached a time, kind of a tipping point when, when people started asking me, why don't you share some of this knowledge that you have developed and tried and tested out in real client projects much more widely? That's when my initial switch was to the academics. From the consulting world, I switched over to academics, where I could share that knowledge in my classes and my research work. But again, after many years, I did not think about writing a book. But of course, people were, prompting me a lot. You should write. You should sort of share this knowledge much more widely. So at another tipping point in 2012, it clicked on me, even though I was ignoring writing a book for many years because I was focused on my work. 2012, so it clicked on me that I should spend probably 1 year or 1.5 years time fully focused on writing the book. That's how the book happened. And I had a wonderful team. Then, of course, I also focused on the fun factor of writing a book. I had a wonderful team of students and colleagues helping me with these ideas and organizing all that information, which has been developed over many years into neat organizing structures and visualizations, as you can see in the book. So, and of course, the book came out. I'm really glad that it is doing pretty well, as I intended it for as a reference book, as a guidebook that will help teams and innovators and organizations and universities, faculty members, and everyone to benefit from.
Now, I loved the book, and I know that the first time I read, I think in your early sections when you speak about, how can people track trends, understand the environment. And for me, it was an eye-opener that there are methods even for that part. So I can completely see the amount of effort and love that you put into writing that book.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah, if you really go deeper into all the ideas that are in the book, there's a tremendous resource which has been worked over time.
Yeah. So, Professor Kumar, one of the things that you said right at the start of your book was that less than 4% of innovation projects actually succeed. And I think you quote research by Doblin that says more than 96% of innovation projects do not succeed. So, why is innovation so hard?
Isn't it pessimistic, Shalini? Yes, it sounds like a pessimistic scenario in which all of us innovators should be concerned about, right?
Yeah.
Why only 4% of innovation that come out in the real world succeed? Can I make an effort from my side to do something to increase the 4% to 4.5% of, say, 5%? Even that will be a great achievement, right? It is hard. Innovation is hard. Is not easy come, right? There's so many forces, so many attributes. You're introducing a new idea in a dynamic world, where so many elements working in a flux, and for the idea to succeed, you have to take care of so many factors simultaneously. Sometimes people talk about complexity and an uncertain world, and things like that. So innovation is hard. That's why we are putting a lot of emphasis on understanding and dealing with it. But if you really, of course, Doblin's research found out this statistic: 96% fail, 4% succeed. Sorry, only succeed. But I was even fascinated by another result when I gave a talk in IBM Innovation Council many years ago, probably mid 90s or somewhere, where they wanted me to address the idea of design to IBM engineers and technologists. So I gave a talk, and that I introduced this statistics at that time. And they were kind of laughing. Oh, we are very happy about those numbers, right? So I was wondering, why are they happy about those numbers? Because it seems in their own internal research that IBM folks have done, the success rate is only fraction, 0.78% success rate, or something of that nature, right? So that's even more pessimistic and dire picture, but that's reality. So, but if you really think about the key reasons why is it so, certain ideas come to my mind. Let me share that with you. One reason is that innovators are so passionate about what they innovate, right? They get into a mode of fully focused on developing a new product or a service or experience, whatever they're involved in it. That passion for doing great work is great, wonderful, but sometimes it results in blinders. Right? Blinders means that you start everything else become out of focus for you because you're so passionately focused on let's say if you're developing a product, you're fully focused on making the functions and features better and bringing technology and everything else, the culture around the product or the government and its regulation having an effect on the product, or the environment having an effect on the product and its competitors and producers, all those peripheral attributes become slightly out of focus for innovators.
Mm-hmm.
That's a danger, right? So that's one of the reasons. Say, for example, technologists or engineers, when they develop a wonderful new innovation as a product, it somehow ends up not being effective for users because they've not started with the people who would use it, and they did not understand the people and the experience. Right? Technologically, the product might be good, it might not be well used by people who ultimately use those products. That's what I meant by the focus. Too much of focus. Sometimes the answer to that is that when you're too focused on one work, sometimes you have to take a step back, right? Let me reflect. I'm not going to do my focus work for something. Let me reflect on the larger picture. You have to deliberately take that action once in a while. So a lot of the methods and a lot of the teaching that we do at the institute is about that. The big picture, the overview sometimes really help. The second reason, as I mentioned a little bit, is the lack of human centeredness of innovations. Any innovation, whether it's a product or a service, an experience or a process or a software or an app, ultimately is going to be used by somebody, right? Somebody, some person, right? So it is so critical and fundamental that you pay attention to how to make the product delightful for the users. If you fail to do that, the innovation has failed, right? Um, yes, and then the third, of course, is the missing systemic view. I already alluded to that. Even if you're working on one thing, you have to look at that thing in relation to the whole system, which is a dynamic flux within which that product or innovation fits in. And the last I want to share is the idea of timing, the timeliness of introduction of innovations is so critical. Right, there's so many examples that we can study where the introductions of product or service or innovations have failed because it was the wrong time. Either the audience were not ready for that product, or the technology is not yet ready to be fully appreciated by the audience. Right? So there's so many examples. A classic example of Newton, Apple's Newton, why it failed is because of the timing issue. Of course, the technology was great, but it is not. People were not ready to sort of and they get into that behavior of computers in the hand and talking to computers or writing freehand to interact. So, of course, after many years, Palm Pilot, built on that time factor. Of course, even after many years of Palm Pilot being successful, iPhone took over with new innovations and things like that. So those are the main reasons why innovations fail.
In your book, one of the things you spoke about again right at the start was that one of your hopes was that as more and more people, understand design thinking methods and understand the process of creating innovation, the prospects for innovation to succeed would increase. Now, in the last decade, we have seen such a rise in the centrality of design thinking. And today, and definitely in the last 5 years, design thinking is being used, for instance, by human resource functions all over the world and in a lot of technology companies in particular to, for instance, turn the lens inward and say, okay, how should our performance management system look like? How should our employee experience look like, et cetera, et cetera. So design thinking has become far more central than it was maybe 20 years ago.
Yes.
But are organizations actually getting better at innovation?
Yes, I do think so. Design thinking, of course, the word design thinking itself has got so many different connotations, right? It is used in so many different ways. Yes, I think if you really look at the evolution of how organizations innovate or how organizations put emphasis on the activity of innovation, if you trace that, you can really see the curve of importance going up. Organizations are becoming much more cognizant of the fact that they have to work on the innovation process itself, rather than previously, many years ago. R&D departments used to do fantastic work, right? Research and development, you developing new technologies based on engineering and scientific principles, and then once they find out those scientific principles and new technologies that has got some potential, then they try to put that into practice through an innovation, whether it is a product or anything that uses the technology or their discovery, and then they think about how to sell that product, which uses that technology. The user comes last, right? So you have the technology first, and the innovation or the product second, and then how to fit it in the user's life or
Mm.
people's life comes last. That's a great process which existed for many, many years. But over
Mm.
time, companies realized you may have to reverse the process. And the reversal of that process is also equally effective. That's
Mm.
where the idea of design thinking came into being. Design thinking starts with understanding people and their needs and their requirements and their motivations and their aspirations and problems and challenges deep, in a very deep way, right? Using
Mm.
very deep methods that we borrowed from anthropology and social science and
Yeah.
cognitive science, understanding people's minds, how they work and their behaviors. So that's a great starting point, but because ultimately a product is going to be used by those people, right? Human beings. So it's a great starting point to develop ideas around. Now you think about what kind of a product will fit into those needs to address those challenges and address those aspirations. And once they come out with a good idea, you might prototype it and all kinds of things, and then you turn that into now how do you make that idea work? Then you think about what kind of technologies will work, what kind of business models you can create around that idea, right? So it is almost a reversal that has happened
Mm.
in terms of process, and they I'm not saying that one is better than the other. They both are important, right? Both these trajectories of working are important. But what is key is the connection between these ways of thinking. Designers working in one direction and technologists working in a different direction. There has to be connection that need to exist between those two processes. So that's what I'm seeing in organizations now.
Mm.
Innovation teams and organizations are multidisciplinary nowadays.
Mm.
They bring in researchers, designers, engineers, financial people all together to form innovation teams who work on innovation from multiple perspectives and multiple streams of activities. So that's very much visible
Right.
these days.
Right. A few days ago, Professor Kumar, when you were and I were having a conversation, you mentioned that, you know, one of your areas of focus and interest these days is the mental models that drive innovation, and
Yes.
how for, at least for leaders, that becomes absolutely critical. So can you say a little bit about what do you mean by the mental models that drive innovation?
Yes, sure, because that's an area of my passion these days, where I'm doing a lot of work on understanding the idea of mental models that creative people use, especially leaders. I call them thought leaders. How can you lead innovation teams and the world organization or the world in general with your thought leadership about ideas for the future? How does that work? So I'm trying to understand that. But that's pretty. It's not that revelation. It's not revelatory. It's been there for all the time, right? We use scales like the abstract real, right? If you look at scales, an abstract real, which is one of the scales that I have used in my book to sort of map out all the design methods. There are real method that will help you understand reality, method that will help you understand your subject in abstract terms. So that's a very key scale or continuum that we all work on at various parts of that continuum. That is kind of parallel to the idea of thought, action,
Mm.
theory, practice, and in the business world, strategy, tactics, right?
Mm.
They're all parallel. They're all complementary. There is vision implementation. There's vision statement that organization put up, the implementation plans. So that scale is kind of very, very universal
Mm.
and broadly applicable to many of the things that we work on. So, for the design perspective, the methods are useful for dealing with my activity. Methods are tools
Mm.
and methods that I use to do my work on real things. On observation, when I do observational research, take my camera, go into the field and do observations. I'm doing my activity using that method to understand people and their behaviors. And when we do brainstorming session, we do an activity to generate a whole lot of ideas. They're all practice-oriented approaches, right? That is somewhere on the scale of somewhere near the real part of the scale. But at the same time, when you practice this activity of innovation, you are informed by what is to be done through thoughts, right? So there's a parallel stream. While the practice is going on, you do so many things, probably many a time iteratively developing a product, research, analysis, and synthesis, and prototyping, and things like that. That when the practice is going on, there has to be a parallel stream of what I call thought stream. But that's where the thinking happens. That's where mental models get developed. The mental model that come to you that you discover need to inform activity. Mental models tell you you have to behave in certain ways to have an effect on your final results. So that'll help me take action on those kinds of ways of doing it. So, so that's why there's a thought stream and an action stream for any kind of sort. So the mental models idea that you asked me about is at the thought stream. Right? All of us have continuously creating mental models about direction for the project, big picture ideas. What do we need to achieve at the end? Right? We all keep those mental models in mind before we jump into the activities. The exploration of the one example is a mental model of exploration. Right? We are in the exploration mode for seeking out many opportunities for innovations in the marketplace. While you're in that mental model of framing out exploration, the parallel method that you might use is brainstorming or scenario planning. Those are methods of practice that you use. But the idea of exploration is in the mind, and you create models how to do that. And you practice those models through tools like brainstorming or scenario planning or whatever method you use to deal with ideas. So the bottom line is that leaders will have to practice both simultaneously. At least they have to be cognizant, even if they are creating this mental model. They have to be cognizant. There is a team working on the field, practicing those ideas and try to make it real. So leaders will have to be much more proficient in terms of taking thought leadership using mental models in order to be clear, credible, and inspiring. Those three things are necessary for effective mental models or thought frame. The word that I use is thought frameworks, framing up our thoughts to behave in certain ways. Right? It has to be clear. If it is not clear, you will not have followers. Nobody can follow it. It has to be credible, right? Any model that you propose will have to be credible. You cannot take an idea from vacuum and say deal with it, right? It won't succeed, and it has to be inspiring, right? It has to make people follow that idea or that mental model. So those are the things that I'm trying to explore in terms of the mental models that are necessary.
In an earlier conversation where I had as a guest another professor, Professor Vijay, we'd spoken about the challenge that a lot of people in many organizations get trained on design thinking methods, but it isn't essential that at the same time the leadership within that organization has an innovation mindset. So in that case, despite many people being trained in design thinking methods, their ability to have a large impact on the organization gets seriously limited because people at the top may not have the innovation mindset that is perhaps so essential for many of the innovations to actually take root. And I think you're speaking about them as being these two parallel streams, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm just going to take a look at some of the questions and comments. Sharath, hi. Greg Chapman, hi. Thanks for joining. Content aside, what has contributed to the bestseller status of the book? Did you use any design thinking methods in getting to the bestseller status? I think that's a great question.
Yes, yeah, great question. Yeah, as I mentioned, I had a lot of fun writing the book, preparing for the book. Where did that fun come from? Applying design thinking on the sort of development of the book itself. So I had a wonderful team, as I mentioned. I had a wonderful team of students and peers that I worked with. So besides the content, that the operation or the activities that we did, we talked to a lot of people. Of course, the content was there. We had to test out whether the content will work for new designers or no new people who doesn't know much about design. So we talked to a lot of such people, and we also had to make sure that the content will work for who have some people who have some experience in design, right? So that they can build on their knowledge. We also made sure that we talked to people in organizations who lead business thinking and technology thinking, who doesn't know much about design approach. Will this content will it work for them? Financial analysts. We talk with financial analysts in organizations. Ultimately, they have a big influence on projects and innovation. Will they understand the process and appreciate the value of it? So a lot of use of research on the field,
Wow.
understanding whether of course, along with prototyping, we had several iterations of the book prototyped. Like sample pages will develop and then go out in the field and talk to people, and then it takes on a completely different transformation. The pages, right? So that's where my students and my team really helped me do the prototype testing and evolution as we went along. And of course, the language and the communication, we had to make sure it comes out very clearly in laymannish language. So a lot of, because when designers or expert, when they write, they use a lot of jargon, right? Words that only they understand. So we had to work with that language and eliminating jargon and make it as clear as possible. It's a lot of effort.
Wow. I can definitely say I've learned a lot from your answer, and I want to try and see how I'm going to use some of this for our next book. So I can completely see how you used design thinking methods for your own book.
Yeah, it'll be effective. Yeah.
Hi, Papia. Papia says, hi, there are so many strategy, design, innovation methodologies. How does one go about choosing the most relevant for a particular business?
Yes, great question. This is one of the most common questions that I've been getting ever since I published the book. Is people ask me, "You have put out this 101 methods out there. Now I'm confused. I don't know in my project how will I use it, right?" So a lot of questions come up there. Um, I deliberately did not want to sort of recommend one set of methods or my point of view on a subset of the methods which will be useful for any context, because that doesn't work that way, because the context for innovation is so different from team to team, from organization to organization. So the team themselves have to make this judgment about what kind of method or process, and somewhat they have to take that judgment about what kind of method, or depending upon the time and the resources and the capabilities that they have to make that final determination. But what I can do to help the team is make them aware of all kinds of methods. And some of them will take more time. Some of them can be done in faster ways. Some of them will take a lot of resources. Like videography, if you have to do it for 3-4 months, lot of resources are needed. It'll take some time. Whereas a simple scenario-based planning exercise can be done in 1 day's time, right? So, or what I can do is lay out a landscape, all kinds of possibilities, and let the teams, specific to a context and a situation, make judgments, make well-informed judgments. That's my task. Give the basic information about this method. That's why I kept the explanation of the methods in a kind of a loose way, even though there are some protocols. First you do this, second you do this, but it is not too tight that you cannot escape from the constraints. It is loose enough for people to build on it or make modifications or make changes and adapt it to their own needs. So that's how I've seen working in organizations.
Yeah. No, I also liked, I think in your approach, it was you don't have to start from here. If you start from somewhere else, you can go back here. So I liked that kind of looseness as well.
Yes.
Rajiv Ranjan, hi. Isn't the universal truth of design thinking applied for and by the nature creator in everything as purpose, from physics to biological laws to math heuristics to psychology to agri to Darwin? Basically, from God particle to expanding entropy, how much do we use universal design thinking in our era yet? Personally, I guess not even an iota. What are your views, please?
That's a big question.
It's a
I
big
don't
one.
know. A big one. I don't know the answer to that. But all I can say is design thinking is sort of an intuitive, sort of believable method or approach, which tries to understand people and their behaviors and their needs, and creating innovation that they can use. That process is so generic, as you mentioned, can be applied to any situation. It need not be for product development or innovations and business innovations. To reflect on what the question is, it can be used to design your life. Right, the same method can be used to design your life. In fact, one of my friends is doing a lot of interesting work on using design thinking for design your own life as you progress in your lifetime. Right, acquisition of knowledge and how you sort of build your family and interacting with children, all kinds of things. Right, it can be the generic principle can be applied there as well. So that's the only answer that I can give, because
It's a good answer. It's a
yeah.
good answer. Vijay Rai, hi. Great session, Shalini. Thank you. Mindset, skill set, and tool set go together. Absolutely. Raj, hi. Thanks for joining. Great session. Thank you. Radhika, hi. How do you see design research methods evolve to accommodate disciplines like behavioral science?
Yes, great question again. Behavioral science, in my definition, behavioral science is a science to understand people's behaviors, right? The behavioral scientist is fully focused on understanding behaviors, trying to understand their activities and how their mind works, how their brain works, how their heart works, things like that, how they reflect in their life as behaviors. It doesn't go beyond that, right? Once you have great insights that come from behavioral science that need to be used by somebody, those insights, right? That's where design thinking comes. The design thinking uses those insights that actually came from behavioral science. Some of these methods that we use for observational research and ethnography and all that came from behavioral science and cognitive psychology and social sciences. And we borrowed those techniques and then looked at the final results of the insight that came out. And then we build on ideas. We take those insights. Now the designers think about how might we do this to satisfy those behaviors? How might we create a new product to go along with the new behaviors that we have understood, right? So it goes to the next step of ideation and synthesis of those insights, create some kind of outcome as a product or a. So that's where the main difference in design thinking and behavioral science, but they're tightly interlinked, right? That's why in 1990, when I was part of Dublin, our vision at that time, the team that we were working on, was to recommend strategies to organizations based on design, right? Rather than business strategies and technology strategies, which is prevalent at that time. So there's a big challenge that we took on, right? How do you compel leaders and organizations that there's value in design-based strategies? There's a struggle, but in those early days, um, behavioral science, social science, the insights from there really helped us, right? That's where we could demonstrate to companies that if you do ethnographic research, go in the field and talk to people, observe them and understand their behaviors, that these are the problems that we have identified. And you should develop products or innovation based on these problems and insights. That become very convincing, right? So that's what we did in those early days, which is very effective in terms of convincing business leaders and financial analysts and technology leaders regarding the value of behavioral science adding to the innovation process.
Let me share that the very first time when I started reading through some of the, more popular design thinking methodologies, one of the things I was struck by was that, because I do a lot of facilitation as well, was that they're so closely aligned with good facilitation processes, which is, you take one kind of thinking at a time, you open out the question, you give everyone an opportunity to contribute before you converge. So I was really, struck by how closely aligned they were to, some of the fundamental principles of facilitation.
Right, yes.
Vijay, how do you use design thinking for digital transformation of a legacy enterprise?
Great. This is interesting. Yesterday or day before yesterday, I was having a phone conversation with a colleague of mine in Japan, who was leading a company based on design thinking called Daishinsha. And I was helping this company and these leaders, my friend, for many years, to incorporate design-based approach to innovations in Japan for their consulting projects. So I was helping them many years ago, but after a gap of many years, almost 10 years, I was talking to him 2 days ago. So one of his observations was exactly about this. He said that in Japan, design thinking and design-based approach is becoming old, becoming sort of commoditized. And according to him, the new focus that everyone talks about there is DX. So I asked him, what is DX? It's a digital transformation, right? So he was saying DT to DX. That's the change that he is observing in the Japanese context. So that is true. That in a way, it is true, because there's so much of focus on the powerful trend that we are all companies are going through in terms of the need for digitization. There's a very strong trend that all of us need to pay attention to, right? The digital products, anything that you do, organization do, is becoming, the outcome is a digital product, whether it is an app or a website or a small software system. So you have to pay attention to that trend, right? That's where design thinking can be molded in a way that fits with that. So I almost think about digital transformation as one instance of an innovation application area. There are so many other instances, like service design is becoming very popular. Social innovations is another instance where a lot of efforts being, sort of given to making social innovations work. So digital transformation is just one instance of that. Of course, the design-based approach is generic enough. It can be applied in all those instances, right?
Let me ask you a question, Professor Kumar, which might be a little bit thorny.
Mhm.
You've worked with organizations all over the world, and I was, just reading through the number of bodies actually in different countries whom you've worked with. How do you feel India's innovation compares with some of the other Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea? Where do you think we stand?
Great. Yes. Yes, I have. I have traveled and interacted with designers and innovation teams and leaders in many of these countries, and especially the countries that you mentioned: Asian countries, China, Japan, Korea, of course, European countries, South American countries, African countries to a lesser extent. I'm trying to do more of that now, but that sort of prompts me all the time, and the question of what is different culturally and in terms of approach and in terms of uh, progress and development. It's always there in the mind. So to your question about India in comparison to some of these Asian countries, um, if you were to ask me that question 15 years ago, I would have given the answer that India is catching up with the new thinking about design based innovation. Um, 15 years ago, when I interacted with them, with teams and people in India, still trying to experiment with what is ethnography, what is observational research, what are user insights, how can those drive ideas. But now things are completely different, right? That's my observation, uh, given Indian context. When I interact with teams in India, people and organizations, I was blown, almost all the time, I'm blown away by the amount of energy, amount of discussion and intellectual interactions that I can have with those groups of people in terms of the new, the future, right? So it is fascinating, really flabbergasted by that rapid transformation that has gone India has gone through. Um, one of the reasons, maybe, my argument for that is, why is that so much of energy and enthusiasm, interest in creating new innovative directions in Indian context? Why is that? So one of my justification for that is, India is a young country, right? India is a young country, which is true, even in statistically, if you look at the whole
Very
population. Yeah, a whole population. In India is a young country. And the median age of in Indian people are 28.7. Median age. Imagine that. Half the people are below 28.7. So only half the people are about 28. That's a very young country. Whereas if you compare that with China, median age is about 38. US is also about 38 point something. Japan is around 43 median age. And is an aging society. All of us know that, right? The population of older generation, the majority of people are in the older generation. That has India's youngness, right? Has an effect on the enthusiasm and energy, the newfound energy and enthusiasm that's my justification. But that does not reflect how the youngness of the population reflects on innovative activities, right? Innovation, no. But in my experience, people are much more energetic in terms of making innovation as a primary activity in an organization, which is contrary to my view 15 years ago. right? Which is, so that's my point of view. But of course, in that respect, uh, I also think there are a lot of challenges. A lot of challenges Indian innovators are facing, of course, socioeconomic challenges, um, political challenges, and organizational challenges. Uh, Organizations have their own protocols and very difficult to change, especially large organizations. But I'm really fascinated by even some of the large organizations like Infosys or Godrej, and large organizations are transforming very drastically in terms of bringing new approaches into their thinking, design thinking, especially. Fascinated by those kinds of activities. There are behavioral and cultural challenges that all of us face. But compared to China, China probably 10 years ago, they were bubbling with these kinds of activities whenever I interact with them, and really enjoyed working with the young people in China with the design projects. But right now, I think the the energy and enthusiasm that I see in India is extremely promising, and so much of potential in building on those opportunities. And building on ideas like Jugad, for example. I talked about this many years ago. Jugad kind of innovation is a fundamental idea that came from ancient, belief in India. That's about dealing with, quick, innovative, alternative ways of solving problems using improvisation and resourcefulness, and frugality, right? So if you given that definition, that's a very important aspect that any design-driven innovator would want to embrace on frugality, resourcefulness, especially in this age in which we talk about energy conservation and the greenness of the environment and all those things. The resources are limited. How do we make best use of those resources? So Jugad is fundamentally catering to that an important concept. So how can we build on the principles that make Jugad work? Can we incorporate that into our design process? Right? There's some tremendous potential in this, in that, and even educational institutions. If I look at some of the design schools and business schools in India, they are also sort of transforming in that potential world, potential future where these kinds of new ways of dealing with innovation is highly explored. So I'm really fascinated by the energy and the potential opportunities that are there in Indian context.
So, one last question, because I realize we're almost at the end of our time. Do you feel equally optimistic by the presence of an innovation mindset amongst leaders of large Indian established organizations?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. There is tremendous potential in really understanding what is an innovation mindset and what are the parts and pieces and frameworks that leaders will have to develop for inspiring others using their mindsets, right? So there, we may have to develop frameworks and tools that leaders themselves can use to practice or gain capabilities in gaining that that innovation mindset. So that's for example, I'll give you a simple example to do that. Earlier we talked about the success rate of innovations. Only 4% of innovations succeed, right? Yeah, so that means you have to measure innovation somehow in order to make that determination. How do we measure innovations? There's no single index available right there so far, but qualitatively we can measure. And then that framework that used to measure innovations can be used as a innovation mindset, in my opinion. A simple example, very simplified example, is a definition of innovation is, a simplified definition that I use It's a viable offering that is new to a specific context and time, that is new to a specific context and time, and it adds value to users, providers, and our society.
Mhm.
It's very
Yeah.
simple definition, but each word is critical there. Viable, offering, new, to a specific context, specific time, creating value for the users, providers, and society. Right? Each word can be measured. Right? If you
Mm.
really go deeper into taking each of those words and ask yourself, is my innovation supporting each of those words or not? If it can
Mm.
support all those words in a very positive way, there is no doubt that I will be successful. Right? So that's a framework that's the mindset or a framework that all of us can use to drive teams, drive our own thinking for idea generation, or even measuring our own results, our own outcome using those words. That's a simple framework that I introduced, but there are about you know more than 20, 25 frameworks like this that can add value to leaders' innovation mindset training.
I look forward to your next book, which I'm sure will speak about innovation mindset training.
Yes.
That was a really fascinating conversation, Professor Kumar. I mean, I'm taking away so much from our conversation, right from the fact that your intent for teaching people design thinking methods was to make sure that there are more people who are knowledgeable in the process of creating innovation. And over the years, you have seen that more and more organizations all across the world have incorporated many elements from design thinking in the way they design their processes, products, and it's become really, really mainstream. I also really like the fact that you point out that being knowledgeable in design thinking methodologies is different from having an innovation mindset. And at least at a leadership level, it's really helpful to understand and build an innovation mindset, which will then support the innovation activities, across the organization. In another conversation, we'd spoken about, the importance of being bilingual, so understanding how to run an established organization while understanding how to run innovation. So I see how that makes a huge difference. I love the fact that you are beginning to, give form to, how do we train people on an innovation mindset? Because over the next few decades, as we enter an era of much, much faster change, almost every organization which I speak to is bringing innovation much more center stage than it ever was before. So a lot of the work that you will do will, really be of benefit for the development of leaders and, of course, then the development of innovation within organizations. Any last words, Professor Kumar, for our
Thank,
audience?
before that, thank you very much, Shalini. It was a wonderful experience talking with you, and thank you very much for your kind words and a wonderful summarization, and appreciation for my work going forward. Absolutely, the last word. Now, all that I can say, based on my own belief, is that lead, right? Lead is a single word. Um, you know, the story is that when I was talking to a student while I was interviewing, I asked the student the question, why did you do design? So many of the students gave me the answer, I want to be a great product designer. I want to do great user research. I want to sort of do good interaction design. I want to develop apps. And this guy told me, I want to be a leader, right? His answer was sort of so resonating, the spirit of the approach that we can take. So all of us need to take that approach of being a leader. Leader is not a prerogative of a few people in an organization. All of us will have to lead, especially thought leadership. All of us will have to lead by our thoughts, right? So that's where we have to put more emphasis and confidently come out in the world and lead with your thoughts and your ideas.
Oh, thank you. And on that beautiful note, we come to an end of our conversation today. For everyone who's joined us, thank you very much for joining us. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do us a favor, share this on your LinkedIn wall, comment, like. We'd love our conversation and these messages to go out to as wide an audience as possible. And do follow us on the Uncube website. I, along with my co-founders, Papia and Just Breathe, work on ideas that will help us all navigate the future of work. So take a look at some of the work we do. Take a look at the past 26 episodes of the Future of Work show and stay tuned for more. With that, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the evening. Bye for now.
Thank you.